All right, we've come as far as Mark chapter 1, verse 29. That's where we left off last week with discussing the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. And so where we've been so far in this gospel is Mark opening up very quickly with 12 words to describe the whole purpose of his gospel as well as the ministry of Jesus Christ. We're reintroduced, I guess, to John the Baptist, who is more like an Old Testament character than a New Testament character, and he bridges the gap. The baton is passed to Jesus. Jesus is baptized. Shortly thereafter, John is taken into custody. We learn in Matthew chapter 14 that he's beheaded. But very much so, things have shifted from John the Baptist's ministry to Jesus now. And we've seen Jesus exercise a certain amount of authority, which would be characteristic of his ministry while on earth. We've seen Jesus teach and astonish people. People's emotions were moved. They were captivated. Their emotions were arrested, if you will. That's the best way to describe it from the Greek language when Jesus would teach. And the scriptures make very clear in Mark's gospel that he taught like nobody else had ever taught before. That's how much he impressed and influenced people. Now, some of those people, like in all cases, were just thrill seekers and just there along for the ride. But many came to him who were seeking an internal fulfillment that they can only find in Jesus. And so how beautiful must it have been to sit at the feet of Jesus and hear him teach or be in his presence. And so along the way, we find out that he begins to put together his team, this team of apostles, this team of disciples. And it's important to remember, which we highlighted last week, which is contrary to what some people mistakenly teach, and that is that the disciples were a bunch of, laborers, like they really weren't too smart. This kind of fell in their lap, and it was a good opportunity. You know what? We might as well follow the carpenter because this sure beats being a very poorly paid labor fisherman. But that just simply wasn't the case. These men left very lucrative fishing businesses to follow Jesus. And so we arrive at verse 29, and it says, and now that word in the Greek language is kai, and it's a connective conjunctive verb, and it's going to be used 22 times in the next 10 verses, so that's a lot. And it's as if Mark is talking like sometimes like a kid talks when they're describing, maybe they just went to a bowl game or they went to an amusement park, and this happened, and that happened, and we caught a foul ball, and I got a T-shirt, and this one signed my autograph, and. It's just an excitement, and you almost have to catch your breath if you were to read this through, because he's going to describe some very incredible events that are going to take place. And so in rapid format, as we said again, like a snapshot, like a photograph, one after another, and immediately, there's his favorite word, used over 40 times in 16 chapters, and immediately after they came out of the synagogue. Well, what took place in the synagogue? They were lighting a candle? No. Jesus was casting out a demon out of a man. And so what we were highlighting is that we see 16 occurrences of people being demon-possessed in the scriptures. None of those times people are believers. They're unbelievers at that point, because a demon cannot possess somebody who belongs to God. God doesn't timeshare. Somebody can be oppressed by demonic forces or discouraged by demonic forces. Certainly all of us, maybe you're not even aware of it, but you've experienced something called spiritual warfare in your life, but you cannot be possessed by that. And immediately after they came out of the synagogue, after dealing with the demon-possessed man, who Jesus cast the demon out of him, and the demon came violently out of him. The demon was afraid of him, we noted last week. And it says they came out of the synagogue. Now, what we're going to find out is they're going to go, it says they came out of the synagogue and they came into the house of Simon and Andrew. Now, Simon is Peter. Now, what's interesting is that archaeological discoveries have been made which places what they believe is Peter's house a stone's throw away from this synagogue that we're talking about. Pretty amazing. In this same area where they believe Peter's house was, they found numerous writings of the Scripture written into stone, sketched, hand script into stone. They found other artifacts as well. and they believe it's the house of Peter, and they believe that a church was there as well. It's pretty amazing, like in the first century after the resurrection of Christ. So pretty amazing discovery. And so this is a stone's throw away from his house. Now, in this discovery, they also found this house is pretty big. It's not a shack. And so, again, it goes back to the point for these men to be fishing and have their own boats on the Sea of Galilee. This was a very lucrative business, and it should also help us to understand that this is not a crutch religion. A lot of people try to paint Christianity as that. Oh, of course they followed him. They were a bunch of losers. They were paupers. They had nothing going for them. No, these men left. This is like leaving, a seat on the stock exchange, okay, or leaving a very lucrative business. You're the CEO. You're the head of something. This is amazing that these men would leave behind these riches. They left it into the care of family. They left it into the care of other people. But the point is they left it. They left it to follow Jesus. Yes. They left their, Peter's wife traveled with him. Church history teaches that outside of the scriptures. We don't find out about their children, but it's believed that people had very large families in those days. It's very possible that Peter's family went on to pastor churches, son pastor a church, but they left behind their family to some degree for these 3 years, yes. For these 3 years that they would follow Jesus, they would leave behind their family. Now, how often would they go back and forth? That's a question, one of those questions you have all of eternity to ask Peter's wife or, whoever to say, how'd that all work out those 3 years, and when did everybody kind of come back together? So there you go, yeah. They were doing their time.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought I remember being taught that Peter was a poor fisherman.
Yeah, it's a misconception. I mean, there's a lot of teachings out there, but
This is nice to hear.
Yeah.
He didn't just walk away from something thinking he'd get something.
No. The fact that they own boats, the fact that he's on the Sea of Galilee, the fact that the main food of the day was fish. It was in demand. It was not only in demand there, it was exported out. So this is a very lucrative business. The fact that they have servants that they leave in charge of it, these are all indications that this was a lucrative business. And again, it speaks to two things. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, and it goes without saying again, is that it busts up that myth that this is a crutch religion. Because a lot of people think that. Well, this is for people who, they're not too smart. They're not rich. They have nothing going for them. So you might as well, why don't you go to church? You got nothing else going for you. You're a loser anyway. That's not the case here. These people were doing well. We're doing well. To leave your business like this really speaks of the commitment they had. And that's indicative of how many of these men would give their life for Christ later on. So we see that then, despite all their faults and their learnings. So,
Learning this makes, at least me, appreciate the apostles even more. Because you don't see a CEO walk away from business very often.
yeah, it does. It makes us appreciate them, and it gives us, I think, a closer look into the humanity of following Jesus as well. That even then, there was this idea of sacrifice that's involved. And it's not for everybody. Not everybody has to give up things like a CEO position or this position here. But the framework is still the same. There still is a surrendering that's involved with following Christ. And I think it's beautiful that the Scripture allows us to see that and unearth these principles. And so they do this archaeological dig, and they find out that this house has an entryway, a gate. It's not just a little shack. It's a two-tier home. So, if this indeed is Peter's home, you got to be making some bucks, some denarii. You got to be selling some fish to have a home like that. But even more important is the fact that Peter's going to welcome Jesus into his home to meet a need. And I think that's something very early on that Mark wants us to see that we need to do in our life. That even if we are a successful person, we're never above inviting Jesus into our home for a need, whatever that need may be. This one was physical. It says, then they came into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. So at this point now, You have these guys have all been called, and they're following Jesus. It says, now Simon's mother-in-law, so that's how we know he's married, Simon's mother-in-law was lying sick with the fever. Now, we've told you before that Dr. Luke gives us more details with medical conditions because he's a what? He's a doctor. Luke tells us it's a high fever. Well, that's what a doctor would do. Mark wouldn't tell you that. Mark's not a doctor. But the fact that it's a high fever, Dr. Luke tells us, and the fact that she was in bed, she couldn't get up, tells us that this was somewhat of an infectious issue that she had going on, and that it threatened her life. Because they didn't have the luxury that we might have today. We take a sick day and we're off, especially when you had guests coming to visit. Very rarely did a woman lay down. A woman's work is never done, And women would very rarely put their own physical needs ahead of entertaining guests and family. So the fact that this woman can't get up and she has guests in her home tells you that this fever, indeed, Dr. Luke is not, well, why would he embellish? But this is not an embellishment. This is a high fever that is threatening her life. And it says, and immediately they spoke, there's our word again, they spoke to Jesus about her. They didn't waste any time. This is the equivalent of prayer. They're going right to Jesus. This is what we need to do. Immediately, they didn't wait. They didn't go, hey, I wonder if he could do this. No, they just watched him blow the crowd away. They just watched him cast a demon out. So they're thinking, who better to speak to than Jesus about this? Now, you and I, with our 2,000-year vantage point and the scriptures and church and music and songs and apps and everything else we got, we have no excuse not to go to him immediately. That's what we should do immediately. They went to him immediately. They spoke to Jesus about her. That is beautiful right there. That's what we should be. We need to be speaking to Jesus about other people. Now, not complaining about, oh, wait, this one did this, and this one did that, and that one didn't look at me, and that one didn't text me, and that one didn't call. Please. After a while, what we need to speak to Jesus about is about people's needs. People have needs. We speak to them about those things. Verse 31, and he came to her, and he raised her up. So the construction of this leads us to believe that she was lifeless, that he had to raise her up. In other words, he had to bring life back to her. She wasn't dead, or else they would have told us she was dead. But she was on the doorstep of death. It's not a nice compliment. It's not something, hey, how do you look like death? That's really not a nice thing to say. But the scripture might as well say she looked like death. She was ready to kick the bucket. But Jesus came in. He came to her. That's what he does. He comes to us. He came to her, and he raised her up, taking her by the hand. What was that like? Now, he doesn't have to do that, by the way. He could just say, okay, get up. What are we eating? Get up, on to the next thing. No, he didn't. He took her by the hand, the tenderness of the great physician. Like when he said to the little girl, Jairus' daughter, sweetheart. That's the equivalent of the Greek language. You don't have to say that. You don't have to take her by the hand. But he takes this woman who's advanced in years by the hand. He raises her up, takes her by the hand, and notice the fever left her. The fever left her. So now, you'll notice in the drop-down box in your notes, we see the power of Jesus now over three things. His power over religion, because remember what they said earlier? He taught as someone who had never been taught like this before. He has power over religion. He has power over demons. And now he has power over illness. So now we're starting to learn things about what's called the deity of Christ, the supremacy of Christ. There's a certain type of power that this Messiah carries that nobody else has ever carried and ever will. The fever left her. Now, before we get to this next part, we must also draw attention to some of the erroneous acts that are done today in terms of healing. And we must look at the account of Jesus to do so. Today, people have programs on television, healing programs, healing ministries. But it's funny, Jesus only heals when the cameras are rolling. It's amazing how that works out. Now, what's sad about it is that the people that are coming to these things are desperate. They're desperate. They have heart-wrenching illnesses in their life, perhaps threatening their life, pain, problems, and they're coming to receive hope. What they don't know is that the people that are going to come up on the stage have already been coached in the background and have signed a waiver and have been told what to do at 7 o'clock when the cameras are rolling. And it's funny how all of these things that people get healed of, they're always invisible ailments. A toe ache, an ear infection, a backache. Jesus would heal people of things that you could not mistake. Blindness, can't fake blindness. Leprosy, we're going to learn about that next. We can't fake that. Here, a woman who's laying dead with a high fever. You can't fake a high fever. You're burning up, you're burning up. And so it's, let that encourage you, because sometimes, and I think that's part of the devil's scheme. He's got people to thinking two things. If you think you are born again, you are crazy. Oh, people said it to you probably. Do you go to a born-againer church? Like it's some type of a cult. You must be born again now. Like, that's a bad thing. But that's in the Catholic Bible. If you're watching at home, it's in the Catholic Bible. That's in the Protestant Bible. It's in every Bible. Let's go to John 3. In order to see the kingdom of heaven, you must be what? Born again. The word means in Greek, regeneration. So Jesus explained all that to Nicodemus. So that's one big myth, and I think that's from the enemy. Let's muddy the waters on what born again means so that we could label everybody this way, and I think healing is right with it. Let's muddy the waters on healing so nobody believes in healing, and people think that people that do believe in healing are crazy. So let's muddy the waters on those two things, and then we'll say that everybody believes in this. It's a crutch religion. Everybody's crazy. I think that is a scam of the enemy. And I could tell you, looking at this, biblically speaking, that's just not the case. And if we do our homework, we see that as I've shared before, the most and the biggest recorded healings in the scriptures are what? Blindness. That's on purpose. So that you can't fake blindness. And it's to put everything into perspective. And so here, this woman is legitimately healed from the healer. Now, could God still heal today? Does he still? Of course he does. Of course he does. Of course he still heals today. Should we be praying for healing? Of course we should. Should we be praying for healing and then do things that are counterproductive to that healing? No, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense. Spiritually and physically, those two go hand in hand. So the fever left her. And notice what she did next. She waited on them, which means she served them. First thing she did, she served. That's how you and I need to treat the healings that Jesus gives to us in our life. He's healed us from our sin. We need to serve him. She served them using her gift and what she was good at and what she was blessed to do. And she waited on them and she was hospitable to them. So should we be with the Lord Jesus and the things in our life. So that is this first section here, 29 to 31. Let's go down to 32 now. It says, now when the evening came, after the sun had set. Now that's important because people heard about Peter's mother-in-law being healed. Now this again plays into the fact that Peter was well known in the community. The big fisherman's mother was sick. Now she's seen serving food. Wait a minute, what happened here? Who healed her? Jesus healed her. Word got out. Word got out so much so that people couldn't wait for the sun to go down to go to Peter's house. Now, why'd they wait for the sun to go down? Well, because in their Jewish law, there's certain things you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath. You couldn't carry anything or anyone on the Sabbath. So they waited for the sun to set, and then they began bringing. Now, it's interesting. This is in the imperfect tense. It's an imperfect tense verb. In other words, the translation could be, they kept coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. They began coming and coming and coming to him, all who were ill and those who were demon-possessed. So notice the Bible separates the two physically because you get people in their nonsense theology. Let me say that clear for the recording. In their nonsense theology that want to attribute an illness, a demon did this. A demon's in that person. That's why. Oh, you got this. You got a demon in you. Oh, you got this. And it's ridiculous that people even say that. It shows that they're biblically illiterate when they talk like that, actually. And it's also discouraging to somebody. Somebody could have an illness. Somebody could got diagnosed with something, and now you got some brainiac in the church telling them, "Oh, you got the demon of cancer in you." What? The person feels discouraged enough. No wonder why people don't want to go to church half the time. So bad theology leads to discouraging garbage that gets put out of people's mouths. Thankfully, that's not going to happen here. Those who are ill, those who are demon-possessed, they're two different things. They're two different things. The Bible classifies it as this. Now, we know that illnesses and evil, we understand all of that. But here it's two different things. So he's healing people who are being brought to him who have illnesses. Now, what were the type of illnesses that he healed? Well, study the scriptures. Leprosy, paralysis, deaf, blind, the lame. He's healing everybody that's brought to him. When you get to heaven, you're going to meet a lot of people who were healed by Jesus in his day. What's that going to be like to meet those people? What were their story? He grabbed this woman's hand. Maybe he healed a little boy who couldn't walk, whose legs were mangled, and he picked the little boy up. Then he said to run. You'll hear probably a few stories like that. Maybe somebody's going to tell you, man, I was never able to hear my mother say, "I love you," and then he touched my ears, and now I was able to hear. What's it going to be like to hear these stories? When we get to heaven, I think it's going to be incredible. There's going to be a lot going on. There's going to be a lot of singing, a lot of praising going on. You would too. You're going to be too. And so he's healing all these people. They were coming and coming and coming. In the imperfect tense, it tells us that. Now, verse 33, this is not an exaggeration. It says the whole city had gathered at the door. I'd be a little nervous if I was Peter and the mother-in-law then at that point. Man, a lot of people are at the door. Picture everybody gathering on your block. That's what this means. Everybody's gathering on your block. What if today, if Jesus walked this earth today and he healed somebody of cancer and word got out? Forget about it. Forget about it. That's what's going on here. Word got out that there is somebody who is casting out demons and who has power over physical illness. It's remarkable. It says, and he healed many who were ill with various diseases, which we noticed, and cast out many demons. Now notice this interesting phrase. And he was not permitting the demons to speak because they knew who he was. Now what does that mean? Well, he didn't want them affirming who he was. They knew who he was, as we mentioned earlier. And he didn't want them, as this last demon did, affirming who he was to the masses. He wanted on his own terms to reveal who he was. He did not want the demons to reveal who he was. He didn't need their help. And also because they're going to falsify things. You have many demons here, not just one. Many demons, it says. And so he prohibited them from speaking. This is very similar to Acts chapter 16. Remember Paul with the slave girl who was demon-possessed? Acts 16, I believe 16 through 18. Very similar. Not permitting the demon to speak because God has authority over the demon. And we must realize that. And you and I must take that to heart today, that when we're battling difficulties in our life, God has authority over such as well. Now, flipping over the notes that you were given, verse 35 of Mark 1, this is a sermon and a message inside itself, this verse. It says, in the early morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went away to a secluded place and was praying there. Can we say that verse together? In the early morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went away to a secluded place and was praying there. This is a very important verse concerning prayer. All of us need to pay special attention to it because it's here that we learn some important facets of prayer. Because you just don't want to have a prayer that's just lip service to God. You don't want to have a prayer that's just performing the perfunctory religious duty that you heard growing up. You want to have prayer that is in fellowship with God. Now, what do we mean by that, to be in fellowship with God? To be in fellowship with God means that you are on the same page, means that God is delighting in it, means that there is a connection, a partnership that has been reached. That's the type of prayer that all of us should desire to have. And that's the type of prayer that's modeled for us in Mark 1:35. Notice it says early in the morning while it was still dark, Jesus got up. In order to get up, and to get up early in the morning, well, there needs to be what? That needs to be made. In fact, if you have a pen, you want to jot this down. Prayer that is in fellowship with God, it requires three things ultimately. First, it requires preparation. It requires preparation. If you're going to have prayer that's in fellowship with God, it requires preparation. Now, why do we say that? To get up early in the morning, this is something that Jesus did regularly, by the way, that assumes that you have good sleeping habits. I don't care who you are. He's God, but he's also subjected to the things of mankind, like temptation and like physical weariness, hunger. He's susceptible to all these things. If you're going to get up early in the morning regularly, those of you who have had jobs where you were required to get up while it was still dark, maybe for a few parties and special occasions you went to bed late, but routinely you had a realistic bedtime. Because if you didn't, you'd crash in a couple weeks. You need to go to bed at a certain time. And everybody's body's different. And also, as we learned in our seminar a couple weeks ago, it also depends on how what nutrition you're doing in your body so that your body can work properly at night. But however many hours it is. Listen, I love to get a good night's sleep, but currently I track my sleep. I'm good with 4 or 5 hours of sleep. Now, sometimes I get more than that, and I'm happy to get those 6, 7, 8 hours, okay? Especially when Benjamin comes into bed. You snuggle, that's reason enough to stay in bed, okay? But and he's a big kid, so he's kind of warm when he lays on you too, okay? But here's the point. We got to have preparation. And if we're going to get up early in the morning, well, we have to go to bed at a reasonable time. And so in the early morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up. Now, what does that mean for you and I? Well, if we're going to get up in the morning and have, even if it's a short time of prayer before we go to work or go to school, whatever it might be, we're going to have to get to bed at a reasonable time, and we're also going to have things somewhat organized in the morning. I find myself, if I'm looking for them, where's my wallet, where's my keys, all of a sudden that cuts into prayer time. So you want to be prepared before you go to bed. Let me lay this out, let me have that set up so I can have that much more time to be with God in the morning. And again, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. So if I can have a little bit of structure before I go to bed, get a few extra minutes of sleep, I can have that much more time to be up early in the morning. That's called preparation. Preparation. Something as simple as putting your purse or your wallet in the same place could help your prayer life. I'm a knucklehead. I lose my keys all the time. I think they have a reality show about me in heaven. It's called Let's See What the Fool Lost Today. It runs every day. It's probably got great ratings up there. Let's see what did he lose today? Lost his Bible again. I mean, this guy's a mess. This guy find his keys, his glasses, forget it. Those things, I lose those things 3 times a day. So, thankfully, when I went to the eye doctor, I told you, the doctor said my eyesight's getting better. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. I'm thankful for that. He said, you're never going to need glasses in the pulpit. He knows I'm a preacher. I told you the story. Each time I go, he goes, they're getting a little bit better. They're getting better each time. You'll never need, as long as you preach, you never need glasses. That's a good thing. So here, the point is preparation the night before. And then it says he left the house and then he went away to a secluded place. I'm all for doing this, hanging out together. Today, I'm glad we've been doing this the last couple Tuesdays. It gets lonely during the week sometimes. So this is a good thing together we're doing. But then there's also times we got to pray privately. And so prayer that is in fellowship with God requires privacy. We've become a culture that has to literally go live on everything we do, social media. People go live on everything right now. It's out of control. When it comes to prayer, Jesus said, go into your prayer closet. They came out with the movie War Room. I mean, listen, whatever you want to call it, war room, war closet, I don't care what you call it. Go into your bed, go in the bathroom, I don't care where you go. Pray But prayer that is in fellowship with God does require a level of privacy, when you could just get along with them. Listen, you might need to cry before God. You may not do that in front of other people. You might be fearful of certain things. There might be certain people who are holding things over you, or who are acting evil, or holding things back from you, and you might really need to get on your knees and seek the Lord. You just might not be comfortable to do that in front of other people, and that's fine. But whatever the case is, you also just need to, on a good day, nothing might be going wrong, you just need to connect with God privately. And then next, prayer that is in fellowship with God requires preemptive prayers. Now, what do we mean by that? We don't need to just wait until the roof falls in to pray. Prayer that is in fellowship with God requires preemptive prayers. Just like in war, you have a preemptive strike. Just like in war, you might take preemptive measures to prevent something horrible happening. That's what people don't understand. There are going to be things that are done by a reasonable government, which should be to protect its citizens, because that is what the Constitution says. So there might be things that are done preemptively to protect people, because there's certain information that might be being heard that can't be shared with everybody, because it would make certain people vulnerable who got that information. It doesn't take common sense to put these things together. So when you start looking at it this way, you go, well, these are preemptive measures. That's called wisdom. Same thing is true spiritually. We don't need to wait till there's a problem with a marriage or a spouse or a friend or a sibling or a child or a parent or a church. We should be preemptively praying. A preemptive strike. Lord, I pray for my children that you protect them. I told you this before, but I have alerts that go off on my phone. Jen is 10:15, Joseph's 10:20, Benjamin's 10:25, the church is 10:30, the Giants at 10:35. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But no, seriously, those go off, and I am praying for my children, for them to be pure, praying for their future spouse, praying, is a combination of prayers. And I just let the Spirit lead on it. Pray against illnesses, pray against addiction, pray for them to be leaders, pray for even their strengths to be blessing, for their weaknesses to be blessed, for their strengths to be used, for God to use them greatly. And you know what? Those are preemptive strikes that I'm taking. I'm not the best father in the world. I'm not the sharpest father in the world, but I'll tell you what, I might as well pray for them. I can do that. So, when you start looking at it, you go, this makes sense. I'm going to preemptively pray for my church. I'm not going to wait till there's a problem. We should be in fact, that's in the membership covenant. That's why people sign the membership covenant. We're preemptively praying for our church. We're praying for the church's unity. What we're saying is, God, we don't want this church to focus on the minors and move people out who have a different agenda. That's what we're praying against. We're praying, God, provide for the needs, provide for safety. We live in a crazy day and age. Churches are considered soft targets today for knuckleheads to come in and do evil and harm. Lord, we pray for our church. These things should roll off our tongue. That's why if you have trouble praying, there's enough to pray for just with preemptive strikes that'll keep you busy till Jesus calls you home. So prayer that is in fellowship with God requires these things. Jesus prayed privately, he prepared, and he took preemptive strikes. Now, verse 36, Simon and his companions searched for him. I bet they did, because the whole town is at his door. Then they found him and they said to him, okay, they let him know what's going on here, and we may have cut that out in your notes, so let me just find it here. Verse 35, it says, Now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed, and Simon and those who were with them searched for him. When they found him, they said to him, Everyone is looking for you. That's not in your notes. That got cut off in verse 37. Everyone is looking for you. In other words, we got a crowd here, and everybody's looking to be healed here. Now, many of those people who have already been healed, they're like the people later on who got fed, the 5,000, really 20,000, who stuck around the next day looking for a free breakfast. They were just there for thrills. So are some of these people here. They're looking for him. What else could he do for us? But listen to what Jesus said here. He said, let us go somewhere else to the towns nearby so that I may preach there also. For that is what I came for. I didn't come here now for everybody to celebrate what I did. I didn't come here to spike the football, in other words. I didn't come here for everybody to go crazy over the fact that I have power over these things. I came for something much greater. And herein lies verse 38. And please, if you ever meet people that have wacky theology, all they ever do is talk about, the Spirit and healing and the Spirit, they get caught up in that. Let them know that's not what Jesus came for. He healed people to show for the ultimate healing, which is salvation. And that could be seen right here. He said, let us go someplace else to the towns nearby that I might preach, for that's what I came to do. I did not come to heal the whole world physically. And I also didn't come to liberate people from the yoke of the Roman Empire. I came to preach the good news. I came to preach salvation in me, in my name. That's what I came to do. And he went into their synagogues throughout all of Galilee, preaching and casting out demons. And so here we have the mission of Jesus, which, by the way, is our mission too. Jesus said, just as I was sent into the world, God, send them. So we are a continuation of this mission here in verse 38. And then verse 39, and he went into their synagogues throughout all of Galilee, preaching and casting out demons. I submit to you this evening that, yes, we have healings on record in the Gospels, but there's thousands of people Jesus healed in addition to what we have here in the Scriptures. Thousands were healed. And when we get to heaven, we'll see that. So many doesn't mean that he chose between eeny, meeny, miny, mo, who I'm going to heal. It just means that it was numerous. It didn't mean many as in terms of many, but there was still some left over. We're led to believe that he healed everybody who had come to him in this particular section that we're reading. And I think that's remarkable. And so Mark, what he's doing here is in that verse, it's amazing, again, Mark and just how quickly he drills into something. He summarizes weeks and months of ministry in this statement here. That he went out throughout Galilee, all of Galilee, preaching and doing this. Now, reading ahead, verse 40 says, now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him and saying to him, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Now, we're going to put our finger there because we're going to come back next week and finish the rest of this chapter. But as you go back and read Mark, even though you've already read Mark 1, really home in on verse 40 down to the end of the chapter once again. And if you are able to, do a little digging. Research what it meant to have leprosy in this day and age, what that represented, how it was basically a social death sentence. You weren't getting invited to too many parties if you had leprosy. Religiously, you were considered dirty. Socially, religiously, nobody wanted nothing to do with you. Then came all the judgments. Well, you have this because your mother sinned or you sinned, something happened. So this man's statement, you will make me clean, is loaded with meaning, as we will see next week. And this is one of many healings, but leprosy was a dreaded disease. It was considered the dreaded disease of antiquity in many ways. And here we're going to see Jesus act on compassion. I'll read ahead here. It says, then Jesus moved with compassion. How beautiful is that? The word compassion in the Greek language means to have your emotions and your insides turned and twisted. And so Jesus was moved with emotion, and he stretched out his hand, and he touched and said to him, I am willing, be cleansed. As soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy, notice again, immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. And so this is a beautiful picture here as we're seeing Mark give us more details to the deity of Jesus Christ. Well, let's move on here to the insights from what we read, these 10 verses this evening. First, Peter's mother-in-law immediately began to serve after being healed. My encouragement to you tonight is to go home and to think about what Jesus has done for you. Where has he brought healing where there needed to be healing? It could be physically, it could be mentally, it could be spiritually. How are you returning the blessing of your miracle to the Lord? And then go a step further. How would you like to return the blessing of your healing to the Lord? Think about that. Think about that and really pray on that and say, Lord, how do I want to serve you? What am I doing now to serve you? Next, Jesus demonstrated power over religion, illness, and demons. A great question to ask yourself is, what do I have going on in my life right now that I have trouble trusting God with? Some of us tonight might have a crisis. Some of us might have a situation where we're being mistreated, misrepresented. We might be estranged from a spouse, a child, a family. We might be mistreated at work. I was talking to a good buddy who doesn't come to the church. He lives in another state, and how there was just some misrepresentation going on at work that could hurt his character. And boy, you hate that when you have your roots down, you've been working in a place for years, and some people are colluding and conspiring against you, trying to ruin your name that you built up. That could really mess with your mind and your heart, knowing that you got other people who have it out for you on the job when you got to feed your family with that income. You know, Jesus has power over these things, and he could have power over those situations that you're struggling with. Maybe it's a financial need, maybe it's a personal need, whatever it might be. Next, Jesus' healing of others was immediate. You want to look at the power of the healing of Jesus. We want to remember that, and you also want to believe that way, because you never know when God's going to require you to be praying for a healing in your life or your family's life or somebody in the church, and you want to have the right focus when you pray with that. You want to have the right focus. Jesus modeled the importance of prayer. We'll end with that as a discussion question. And then finally, the other insight that I wanted to share is from verse 39, is that we are to be a continuation of Jesus' mission. And we want to think that way and believe that way. And one of the tangible ways that we could do that is by, when we take a break, next week will be our last week, we'll come back to the study of Mark. We're going to take a break from the study of Mark. Now, why are we doing that? Because we really believe in the power of small groups in our church. And I want every one of you to be in a small group. Maybe some of you could host one if God leads you to it. Joe's here tonight. He'd be happy to talk with you about it. Being in a small group is like continuing the mission of Christ, because you're going to be learning the scriptures, but you also have the opportunity to invite people to it and to fellowship with people who are in the group. And so we're continuing the mission of Christ by not being secluded, but by coming together.